Um, okay, so Dennis.
Mm-hmm.
Dennis has been with the GLT for how many years?
I started with Guelph Little Theater in the summer of 2006. I was invited by a friend who was already involved in the theater to help out on a production of Death of a Salesman. And it sounded like something I might want to do. I've been doing sound for churches and stuff like that for quite some time. And he invited me to help him out on Death of a Salesman. I decided to give it a try. And I've been here ever since.
You know, can you talk to me about what would be involved in doing sound for, I'm putting my fingers up and close, for Death of a Salesman? I mean, I know a little bit about the play, but I'm thinking, like, sound?
Okay, so what I was asked to do is what we call soundscape design. And so my job is basically to coordinate with the director as for what sound effects and music effects and that sort of thing, anything related to sound that he or she wants in the play. And then to source those elements, I find the sound effects, if they're available, like on the web now. Virtually everything's on the web now. When I started here, we were still making a lot of our own sound effects, and so I would record those, source out the music and that sort of thing, and just make sure that the audio experience supported what was happening on stage and what the actors were up to.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that? About what you mean about making the experiences consistent?
Okay, so for example, excuse me. So if an actor goes off stage to say, answer the door, it adds to the realism if there's a sound of a door opening coming from off stage and then closing again. Or there's a car driving up, and so lighting might have the car headlights go past the window. Well, I'm going to have the sound of the car engine, the sound of the tires on the gravel driveway, maybe, all those sort of aspects happening from off stage as well, so that it just fills out the landscape. We call it soundscape. So it fills out the landscape of what's happening in the play. To say, oh, gee, Bob's here, and there's no sound of a car, no sound of a door or anything like that. It's just kind of hollow. But by having the right sound effect in the right place, then it just comes across as more real. And the audience has a better experience, I believe, for doing that right. The same is right with music. You pick the music for scene transitions. Maybe you'll do what we call underscoring a scene, where there's a little bit of music playing. Now this is quite prevalent. You'll notice it in movies. And a good underscore can make or break a movie. Well, the same with a play. Having the right piece of music to punctuate a scene or to cover the transition between scenes can set the stage for the next scene. It can foreshadow what's happening in the next scene. And that helps to make it a more immersive, engaging experience for the audience as well.
So how do you liaise then with the director to come up with the right sound? I don't know, I'm going to call them effects. How do you liaise with the director to make sure that what you're suggesting is correct, or does she tell you what she needs?
That depends entirely on the director.
Okay.
Pretty much universally, it starts with me getting a copy of the script, and I go through it and I identify any scripted effects.
Okay.
So if the script says sound of a gunshot from stage left, then I make note of that. Okay. And then there's production meetings throughout the process, usually led by the stage manager or the producer, depending on the production. But I would go through the script with the director, and I will sit down with them, and I will say, okay, so we have a gunshot coming from stage left. What kind of gun it doesn't specify in the script what kind of gun it is. What kind of gun do you see it being? Is it a shotgun? Is it a rifle? Is it a .38 pistol? how big, how small a gunshot sound do you want? And maybe also during the course of reading the script, I might notice a few places where I think a sound effect happening here or there might help. So I'll make note of those and I'll suggest them to the director, and some directors will welcome that and some won't. Over time, you get to learn how to interact. It's personal relationships. So yeah, some directors are quite open to it. Some are even waiting for you to tell them what they should do, because maybe sound isn't their forte. Maybe they're used to dealing with actors. Anything that walks and talks, they're interested in. If it doesn't, they're happy to leave it to somebody else. So it's very much a play-by-play thing. Each play is a slightly different experience depending on who's involved and who wrote it and what kind of play it is.
And it sounds like it's very much an interpersonal relationship as well.
It should be. Mm-hmm. Good director relationships with tech, it all starts from the point of respect. Some directors have a great deal of respect for the technicians, for lighting and sound and stage building and that sort of thing. Some directors, unfortunately, they get caught up in their own thing, and tech can be an afterthought with them. Mm-hmm. And you may have to be a little bit more outgoing and remind them that you exist. Not that that's a bad thing. They're not being a bad director necessarily. It's just their personality. Mm-hmm. They just tend to focus on this thing or that thing, and they're happy to leave the technical decisions to the technical directors or to the individual sound and lighting designers. It's just everybody has a different working style.
Well, so I'm going to ask you about that. So when I think of theater, like way back before either of us were born, a long time ago, Greek theater, for example, I wonder how much the emphasis was on, and please forgive my ignorance, how much the emphasis was on the external sound, be it the waves or the birds or whatever, and how much the emphasis was on the language. Like, how does your work relate to the language of the play?
Again, it depends on the play. There are instances where having, like, the sound of waves and wind and birds and stuff that you're talking about is what we call ambience. Okay. And there are times ambience helps. And so the ambience will carry throughout the entire scene. Other times, ambience can be a distraction. And so what we may do there is we'll start off the scene, let's say it's in a jungle. We'll start off with some nice jungle noises. You've got birds and the odd monkey or something like that, and the wind in the trees. But it would be a distraction throughout the entire scene. So we'll start it, and then over the first 2 to 3 minutes of the scene, it'll slowly fade out and disappear. So it's established the scene for us. We know that we're in a jungle, it looks like a jungle, it sounds like a jungle, but we don't need to be reminded where it is throughout the entire scene. And then we might bring it up again a little bit here and there where we may need a reminder. And then we often bring it up again at the end of the scene as part of the transition out to the next scene. So we're transitioning from the jungle to the camp, let's say, or something like that. So again, there is no real hard and fast rule. That's where the creativity part comes into it. What will help in this situation and what won't. And so it's very much a learning experience. Some of this stuff can be taught. I've attended a number of seminars and workshops on sound design over the years. I've conducted a couple. And some of it's a matter of just, how big a vision for this project does your director have? I've worked with directors who I came in and they've got it all. They know exactly what sound they want, where. They've even sourced some of the sound files. And basically I become a computer technician, loading them in a computer and pushing the button when I'm told to. And that's fine.
Do you find that satisfactory?
It is. It can be. It's about, I like to think it's about my attitude. What is my attitude going to be going into this? I mean, am I here to have a fulfilling experience for me? Yeah, in part. But my bigger responsibility is to assist the director in fulfilling their vision. And if in a particular instance my role in that is small, okay,
I'd like you to think for a few minutes about your role, and I'd like you to think, I guess the question, I mean, I'm sure there's a sophisticated and a fancy way to ask the question, but my question is, so Dennis, why do you do this? I mean, you don't get paid a bag of money, you know that.
Yeah.
Like, why do you sit up here and look at the stage and say, okay, we're gonna make the soundscape? Like, how come?
The short answer, it's fun.
Okay.
I have fun doing it. I didn't wear it today. I've got a T-shirt that says "Theater is my sport."
Okay.
So yeah, some people. I have a friend who's really into disc golf. He's out there every weekend playing disc golf. I'm not that guy.
Yeah.
I used to be a cycling guy when I was younger, but that's not so easy. Now I'm into my 70s. I've never been a real athlete or anything like that. But for a long time now, this has been how I have fun. I sometimes refer to Guelph Little Theater as my sandbox, where I get to play with all my favorite toys. And yeah, I get a kick out of it. And as long as it's fun, I'll probably keep doing it.
Is this connected in any way to back in the olden days? I'm sure you had some kind of paid job. Is this connected, because we all have to make a living, right? Is this connected to any kind of thought anywhere in your brain? Are the two kind of things connected?
To some small degree. I've worked on a part-time basis and volunteer basis with doing sound for a few churches in the area.
Mm-hmm.
I'm currently the technical director for one of the churches in town on a part-time basis. And so that was more of a service thing. That was, it worked out as being kind of part, which is one of the reasons that director came to me at church. Lloyd came to me at church that day and asked me if I'd work on Death of a Salesman. Because he'd seen the effort that I put into the church services, I guess, and some of the Christmas pageants and stuff like that we did there. And he felt that I probably had the talent to help him out on the sound design for this play that he was working on, Death of a Salesman. And as my years went by, I've gotten older, I guess I've come to the realization that I regret the things I said no to a whole lot more than the things I said yes to. So I've tried to develop a habit of saying yes.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, there's opportunities I had to do things and it just sounded like too much trouble and it just sounded like too much work, and I turned them down, only to find out later when I heard from the people who did do them that it was an incredible experience. It was amazing, and they got to meet celebrities, and they did a whole bunch of other stuff. And so, yeah, I was at a business conference one year just before I started doing this, and the guy that was speaking said the same thing. He said, I've had nowhere near as many regrets from saying yes to something I've never done before as I've had to saying no to something I've never done before. And so when Lloyd came to me that day, I'd never done anything like this. I'd never done a play, and I'd been involved in drama a little bit in high school because it was an easy credit.
Sure. So you took it, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people took drama in high school just because it was an easy credit. But I decided, when Lloyd asked me, I thought about that point. I've regretted saying no more often than I've regretted saying yes. So I said yes. And I haven't regretted it. It's been great. This has been one of the most rewarding things I've ever done. It's my creative outlet. It's it's my art, it's my sport, it's, my hobby. Some people play hockey and collect stamps. I make theater.
Tell me, Dennis, where did you go to high school?
John F. Ross, CVI, right here in Guelph. I was born and raised in Guelph. I went to John F. Ross. Kay Mackay was my drama teacher, and Kay Mackay was heavily involved in Guelph Little Theater as well. Not a surprise. She also lived up the street from us, and she was a friend of my mother's, which made high school. But if I'd thought that through, I might not have taken drama because, Kay knew me, and so when I showed up in her drama class, it was, Dennis, show the class how to do this. Dennis, show the class. And so I became the one that ended up getting cornered all that because Kay and my mother were friends. Yeah.
Well, that's one of the things about growing up in it. I'm gonna show my own bias here, in a small town. You know people who know people, and
Yeah.
everybody knows everybody here.
Yeah, and that's the way it is in community theater as well. There's Gulf Little Theater, there's a Lower Community Theater, there's Gulf Little Theater, now Gulf Community Players. Yeah, and we all interact all the time. We borrow set pieces from each other and costumes, and a lot of the actors work plays hither, thither, and yon. Some of them are semi-pro, we've got, or pro, they'll probably hate me using the word semi-pro, but like there's Downtown Theater Project and Fourth Wall Productions and stuff like that. A lot of them came out of the community theater experience. And we all know each other, and we all try to help each other out.
What is it, do you think, if you had to sit with I'm learning about Guelph. I've learned that there's an engineering program at U of Guelph. Who knew? If you had to sit with somebody in the engineering program, the civil engineering program at U of Guelph, and tell them or help them understand the value of a community theater like GLT or any other to their life as an engineer, how would you tell them?
I would tell them that STEM needs an A in it so it becomes STEAM.
Tell me more.
I've always felt STEM was a good idea, but it's missing the arts. I've always felt we needed to put an A in there and turn it into STEAM. Because the arts, whatever they are, they can drive anything. For example, like, okay, you talked about engineering. We engineer stuff here all the time. You're doing Peter Pan. Okay, well, how do you make a 120-pound actor fly across the room safely? You know, that takes engineering. How do you... We need a World War I biplane to emerge out of a guy's imagination in the middle of a kitchen scene on stage in a play. How do you engineer that? What engineering can help us pull that off, which we've done here, by the way. We had kitchen cupboards and countertops turn into a biplane. And it took a fair bit of engineering to pull that off. The arts make you think in ways that daily life doesn't make you think. The arts really makes you answer the question, what if? What if we had a world on the other side of the looking glass and it was all reversed? What would that be like? What if we went down the rabbit hole? There's a good one. We went down that rabbit hole. That's from Alice in Wonderland. That's like what happened to Alice. And that has found its way into common usage. It's now a thing to avoid on the internet, is going down that particular rabbit hole. This is where our culture developed. It's in the stories we tell and how we share them, and how we share those stories has driven the entertainment industry, it's driven Hollywood, it's driven live theater, and all of the engineering stuff has found its way into that as we do lights and we do sound and set design and trying to make it all work. Engineering is about taking all the different parts and putting them together so they work cohesively towards accomplishing a task. And I think arts is a good contribution to that. And I hear them talk about STEM on the internet and on TV and stuff all the time. And yeah, in my world, I'd like to see the A put in STEM to make it STEAM. And then, because STEAM is powerful. STEAM can drive things. STEAM can push things. Our world ran on STEAM for most of a century. And yeah, I just think it's a much better, broader focus to bring people into.
And at what point then in the education system would you stop the streaming that happens? You know, you got your science kids here, you got your arts kids here, you got your engineering kids here, you got other kids here. At what point would you stop that streaming to integrate what you're talking about?
Right from the start. I think dividing it up into streams is where we started to go wrong. I remember taking art class in grade school. I remember taking music in grade school. I'm not a musician, but I have a basic understanding of how music works because of what I learned in grades 3, 4, and 5, where we learned the basics of music. I think it's, yeah. When I was starting to go to high school, you either took academics, you took business, or you took shop. And I think that's where we started to split. We started to go sideways because my mother insisted that you had to get parental approval back then. I'm old.
Not as old as you think. You
So I couldn't just decide on my own which stream I wanted to go into. My mother insisted I went into the academic stream. I would much have preferred to go into the art stream. I wanted to learn music, but my mother, she insisted. My dad also insisted because he didn't want me to have his construction background as my career. He wanted to see me in academics as well because that's what they thought, so they forced me into that stream. And that wouldn't have been bad if, I think it would have been much better and much rounder if that academic stream had included a little art. If there had been somewhere in one semester even just a few weeks of art, if there had been somewhere in one semester even just a few weeks of shop, just so that I had a more well-rounded experience, because I didn't learn a lot of that stuff until after I left school, because I was interested. Learning it while I was in the academic stream wasn't something that came easy. I had to go for extracurricular, I had to do something else otherwise, and yeah, I didn't, and I regret it now. Not that my life is terrible. I love my life. I love where it is, but I often wonder where would it have gone if I'd started music sooner.
Did you, when you finished high school, did you have to go out and get a job, or did you go to university? Or
I'm one of those guys who had to quit high school and go to work because his dad got sick and couldn't. I didn't finish high school until I was in my 40s when I went back to school and got my diploma. Yeah, I was one of those guys, unfortunately, who had to go out and get a job because the bills needed to be paid. And my dad couldn't work for about 6-7 months. And so I had to leave school and do that. So yeah, that was a lot more common back then. Doesn't happen quite as much anymore from my understanding. But it was very much a part of my reality.
And what made you decide to go back to school?
I always valued I had a bit of a dream. If you'd have asked me back in high school where I wanted to go, I probably would have wound up a history teacher. Or I probably would have wound up in a history course in university with a minor in English Lit, something like that. And there was a part of me just didn't like the idea of that being incomplete. When I filled out my resume and all that sort of thing, looking for work, there was this gap. No high school diploma. I didn't finish high school. No post-education. And when I went through a period of unemployment in my 40s, I just figured now's the time to fill that gap. And so I went back to school and finished my high school. I got the credits I need to finish that. And I took a business communications course just to give me a potentially marketable skill. And it just went from there.
And what kind of work did you do then after you?
I wound up working for a small company that wholesaled small engine parts. So like if you needed your lawnmower, your gas trimmer, your chainsaw, your leaf blower, whatever repaired, there's about a 25 to 30% chance your repair person was buying parts from us. I made some connections through church and a couple of other places, and they were looking for somebody. So I took the job. It was supposed to be temporary. I was there for 25 years.
It happens. I've had jobs like that.
Yeah.
So you've mentioned two different situations. The question I'm going to ask you, I'm not going to ask you about your beliefs because we can't. I mean, you can talk to me about it if you like. But what you did at the church, and I'm not talking about the technical aspect, the sound, how you felt at the church. I'm going to ask you if you can reflect on that and reflect on whether there's any connection at all with how you feel here at the theater.
There is. I consider myself very blessed to be a part of two really terrific communities. My church community, which is very supportive of what I do, and to which I have a very real connection, and my theater community, which is also very supportive, and there's a very deep connection there. And I especially find it rewarding when the two communities interact, when I can do something with church and theater interacting. For example, I decided last year to branch out into directing, not just doing sound. An opportunity came up, our Christmas production this past 2024 Christmas season. Due to ill health, lost its director. And I was familiar with the play they decided to do. I was asked if I'd be willing to step in, and because they knew I'd been thinking about directing, and so I did. I was able to step in. Because of the nature of the play, Best Christmas Pageant Ever, there was a church connection to it. And so I was able to pool resources from both the theater and my church community to make that happen. In fact, one of the leads in the play was one of the pastors from the church where I was attending. And she didn't get the role for that reason. She was really good. You know, ask anybody, she'll tell you she was good. But yeah, it was very rewarding for me to have both those communities come together in that experience. Because to me, that's what it's about. It's about community. There's an old line, no man is an island. And I think that's very true. I tried being an island for a lot of years. When my father died, it was a very traumatic experience for me, and I pulled into myself, and I had very little contact with people for a long time after that. And church and theater helped bring me out of that. So to me, they're connected. To me, they are very much both a part of who I am. Not that everybody needs to be involved in church or everybody needs to be involved in theater, but I do believe everybody should have a community that means something to them so they can be a part of something that's bigger than themselves. Because there's a difference between being alone and loneliness. And I work alone a lot of the time in theater. I'm back here, I'm not sitting at this desk, it's dark out there, and if I do my job right, nobody knows I'm there. And so, but that doesn't mean I'm lonely, because I'm not lonely, because I'm a part of this wonderful community that makes these things happen.
I'm so, see, I don't worry about it. I'm an audience. I'm very, very interested, Dennis, and these are not on my list of questions at all. What we're talking about is not on my list, and that's why it's just sitting over there. I'm very interested in hearing you talk about the connection between the church and the theater. And I want to hear more.
It's me. I don't think that same connection would probably happen for necessarily everyone. I've been raised in the church my whole life. You know, I was an altar boy in the Anglican church growing up. I was in the choir in the Anglican church growing up. My mother taught me to read in a combination of Shakespeare and the King James Bible. It's always been there, and it's important to me. I went through my rebellious period in my late teens, early 20s, where I thought I don't need church, it's a funky old thing. And I found it almost impossible to not believe, no matter how much I tried. But that's me. And so I find people in community theater of my own faith and other faiths. We have a very broad range of people here. We have people from other experiences, Sikhs and Muslims. We've had a few of them in theater. Not that that's a big deal, but it's what makes theater community work, is having people from all these different experiences come in and bring different things to the table. I wish it was more diverse than it is. You know, theater, especially when you get into like the Shakespearean theater and some of that, it can be very white-centric. It can be very Caucasian-centric simply by its very nature.
That's who he was.
You know, that's who they were. But even Shakespeare explored the dynamics in plays like Othello and Merchant of Venice and that sort of thing. Even there, the cross-cultural dynamic comes into play. The cross-faith dynamic comes into play. And theater allows you to explore some of these subjects in ways you maybe wouldn't. I'm currently directing one of the one-acts that's in this. It's called The Script. And there is a spiritual aspect to it, where there's one of the characters is struggling to reconcile their belief with what's happening in the real world that they can't handle because it's so contrary to their belief. I'm not going to give you any more of a spoiler than that.
I'm going to have to come see it.
But theater and fiction in general lets you explore these themes in ways that are more difficult to do, say in the workplace at a insurance company or something like that. It's one of the things that's always attracted me to science fiction. Science fiction is able to explore these things by bringing aliens into the equation instead of other humans that just happen to think differently. And yeah, it's about life. It's about exploring all of this stuff. And I get to do it from the perspective of what are the sounds, what is the sound of life? What does life sound like? What does faith sound like? What does business sound like? Because we have not just 5 senses, we have numerous senses, but sound is one of the prominent ones, and it plays into our experience more than some of us may think.
Talk to me about that.
Name for a little theater
Well,
group,
do
the
you know
Curtain
about the
Club.
Curtain Club?
I love that name.
Yeah, we're back up and running, so
Okay.
anytime you guys are.
All right. It's interesting to me how you have been integrating your spiritual life and we'll call it your well, I don't know what you call it, your life for fun. That's here, and you're, we've all got to make a living.
Yeah.
And my question to you is, I gather you worked in small, what I would call small business.
Mhm.
My question to you is, how do you think your spiritual life and your life here at the theater, because, and I'll ask you to talk about, you've talked about the connection a little bit, and I'm going to ask you to talk about that a little bit more, but how do you think that influenced your commercial life?
Probably not as much as you might think, simply because my role in that life was fairly small.
Okay.
I was a shipper receiver.
Okay.
So, people would order stuff, I'd put it in a box, tape it up, and give it to Pure Labor. And that was in part by design. I came to realize that I actually enjoyed not having a career. I went to work, I did my job, I came home. I didn't think about work until about a half hour before I got there, and I stopped thinking about it a half hour after I left. And that was very freeing for me, because it's what I did for a living, it's not what I did for a life. What I did for a life happened here at the theater or happened at church. I don't think, for me personally, I can't separate my spiritual life from the rest of it, because what I believe informs most of my decision making. What I believe informs a lot of my interpersonal relationships. In some ways, I wish it informed it more than it does, because I'm human, I make mistakes, and I fail to live up to my own standards sometimes. Simply because, every once in a while, it just gets to be stressful, it gets to be too much, and so we make bad decisions, and that's life.
But isn't that the human condition?
It is the human condition.
I mean,
which is, again, what brings me back to theater.
Yes.
It's about exploring the
yes,
human condition.
yes.
And it's about exploring the human condition no matter what you do in theater. You don't have to be on stage reciting lines in order to be part of that experience. The set designer is part of that experience. The lighting designer is part, and the sound designer is. I said a few moments ago that sound affects how life unfolds in ways we maybe don't even think about. One of the things that's really interesting for me now is everybody's out there curating their own playlist. So what they're essentially doing is they're creating their own underscore for life.
Yes.
They're creating their own soundtrack. And so I wonder, excuse me, I sometimes wonder, what decision might you have made in that situation if you'd been listening to, I don't know, Disturbed instead of Maroon 5 at that moment? How would the soundtrack that was playing in your mind or on your iPod, on your earbuds or whatever, how would the music you were playing at that moment have affected your decision? How would the ambient sound of your environment? Some of us go looking for the coffee shop experience for working because we find it more conducive to the work we're doing. So would you make the same decisions sitting in the coffee shop as you would sitting on a park bench? So these are the kind of things that theater explores. What if we take this conversation right now and we put it in a hockey arena? And two people having this conversation in a hockey arena might lead to one conclusion. If we take that same conversation and recast it into a Tim Hortons, would it lead to a different decision? How much would the environment affect the decision-making process? How much would the environment affect the conversation itself? Would we have chosen different metaphors? Would we have chosen different stereotypes in the conversation? So it all connects.
What's interesting to me is you've chosen two quintessentially Canadian places
Yep.
to have your conversation. Was that by design or was that just, that's how I think?
It's the only part of me that thinks Canadian. I'm a horrible Canadian.
I don't think so.
I don't play hockey. Never have. I can't skate to save my life.
Don't worry about it.
And yeah, I drink Tim Hortons coffee simply because it's inexpensive. I can't afford $7 for a cup of coffee every time I want a cup of coffee. Otherwise, I'd probably be buying my coffee somewhere else. But yeah, I tend to think in, theater does that to you. You tend to think in images. You tend to think in environments. You tend to think in how would this play for an audience? So if I'm going to use a metaphor, which metaphor is the largest portion of my audience going to relate to?
And what about silence?
Science?
Silence.
Silence. Silence is loud.
Talk to me about that.
Silence is loud. There is a time for everything. There is a time for underscore. There's a time to not underscore. There's a time for a sound effect, and there's a time to not have a sound effect. In the right context, at the right moment, silence can be a very important tool. There's a reason we call it the pregnant pause. There's a reason we call it awkward silence, is because without that silence, the situation loses its awkwardness. It distracts from, the reason you have awkward silence is because that silence forces the people involved in the conversation to think about what was just said. It forces the audience to think about that moment. And any sound effect there, even the crickets that everybody, the stereotypical crickets, would be distracting from the moment, would ruin the moment, and it would fail to fulfill its potential. And so yeah, silence can be very loud at the right moment.
Can you tell me a story about a time when you've used silence to emphasize a point or bring something home in the theater and have seen it work?
Not specifically yet. There is a couple of moments in the one act that I'm directing right now where we have a moment of silence. And there's been a few times I have wondered if we need to fill that gap, and came to the conclusion, no. As awkward as it feels, as uncomfortable as it feels for those two characters to just stand there and stare at each other for 20 seconds, they need to. They need to do that in order for them and the audience to appreciate just how awkward that situation is. And which is why it came to mind, because the temptation in our world has become society to fill in the silence. We don't want silence. We want that stimulation going all the time. We got to put in the background music. We have to put in the sound effect. We have to keep talking because silence is deadly. Because if it's silence for too long, we're going to flip to a different TikTok channel, or we're going to flip to a different YouTube channel. But silence talks. Silence is loud. Silence says something in the situation where it exists. And if we don't take the time to listen to it, we're going to miss the point.
Do you see elements of the respect for silence in your liturgical experience as well?
Oh, hugely. Yeah. I don't want to get preachy here because,
You're
but if
talking to a friend.
yeah, if you're praying, if prayer is a part of your existence, and you don't take time to listen for the response, you're only doing half the job. And so a lot of people will think that way. They will think, God help me. God, I need help here. I need out of it. And then they just go right on trying to deal with the problem themselves instead of stopping for a moment and seeing if God talks back. And it's not always, like in my experience, it's not always going to be the big loud voice or anything like that. It's just going to be, maybe if you stop for a moment, a thought will occur to you that wouldn't have occurred to you if you just kept on going. You need to still yourself for a few minutes so that the process can accomplish what it's designed to accomplish.
Now, can you take that to a theatrical experience and imagine an audience of 200 dealing with a minute of silence and stillness on the stage?
That's the challenge. That's the challenge.
Okay.
Like I say, there's going to be a moment. And in the script, it actually says the two words, awkward silence. So this person says something, then there's awkward silence before that person ends up speaking again because the other person doesn't say anything. Mm-hmm. So as a director, what I have to decide is, how long do I let that silence persist? So I need to let it persist long enough to become awkward. But if I let it persist too long, it becomes uncomfortable. And there's a difference between awkward and uncomfortable.
Talk to me about that.
So I have to make it long enough to do the job, but short enough I don't lose my audience in the moment. And that's the challenge. That's the director's job. The actors have a hard time maybe making that decision because it's like the old can't see the forest for the trees thing. They're too close to it. Mm-hmm. They're busy looking at it from their character's perspective. The director needs to step back and look at it from the audience perspective. And so, yeah, that's one of the decisions I've been struggling with in this is how long do I let that moment of silence persist?
I can't wait to see the play. I can't wait to see it. I'm conscious. What I want to say to you is you're 10 years in the future. Before we started, we were talking about that 100th anniversary. What's the message that you want somebody looking at this conversation 10 years from now? See, I'm a historian too. 10 years from now, what do you want to tell them?
Don't stop. Don't quit. There's going to be times where you ask yourself if it's all worth it. The arts is worth it. Wow. Theater is worth it. Theater has been with us for thousands of years. We have had theater of some sort going back to when hunter-gatherers gathered around the campfire telling stories. And then we went through Greek theater. And then we went through Roman theater. And then Shakespeare came along. And then, movies came along. We're still telling stories. And some stories will go on forever. So don't stop telling the stories. I hope we're telling some of the same stories 10 years from now. I'm hoping we have a whole lot of new stories to tell 10 years from now. But for me, what's important is that Gulf Little Theater is still here telling life stories. And there's still people coming to hear those stories because they either just want to be entertained or because maybe they need to hear that story. Maybe they need to experience that moment because of something that they're going through. And though you had no intention of helping somebody deal with a life moment, maybe the life moment of your characters is going to help one person in the audience get through their life moment. You never know. And so don't stop, don't give up.
So theater for you is not just something to do in your spare time and to have fun, but
I'm blessed that it's both a pastime and I guess in some ways a mission. It's, yeah, stories, telling stories is how we process things. Telling stories is how humanity has always processed how society works. The stories from Charles Dickens complaining about the sweatshops that he worked as a kid in Oliver Twist and the like, to Star Wars and the great grandiose battle between good and evil that seems to go on for time immemorial. Telling our stories is how society grows, is how society develops, it's how we live and learn, and we have to constantly be looking for new, innovative, and reviving the classic ways that we tell stories so the stories continue.
and the sound assists with that how?
The sound fits with that how because it's part of the human experience. Now, no, there's a whole lot of people don't hear the sound. I have, but they feel the vibration. Even deaf people feel the vibration of sound. They will tell you that. I've had that conversation with a few of my deaf friends. That they don't feel like they're missing anything necessarily when they don't hear music because they feel the vibration that music creates. And that's what sound is. It's a vibration. Just everybody's experience is differently. A life without sound completely, if there was no sound, if there was no vibration of any kind, it would not be life as we know it. It would be something vastly alien to what we currently experience. And so it needs to be reflected in theater as much as anywhere else.
That's wonderful. Dennis, thank you so much for taking the time. I'm not sure you knew exactly